Hello, and welcome to this webinar on listening to children when they are children, part of the ANROWS series, helping people understand and make use of Australia's national research agenda to end domestic, family and sexual violence. I'm Tessa Boyd-Kane, and I'm really privileged to be the CEO of ANROWS. I'm joining you today from unceded Gadigal lands, and I want to pay my respects to elders past and present, to those joining us in the discussion today, and particularly to acknowledge the continuing custodianship of these lands and the care of country as well as community by the Gadigal in these lands and by the traditional owners wherever you're joining us from. I acknowledge this land always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I recognise the critical importance of centring and supporting the leadership of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities in the evidence to drive change as we work towards improving women's and children's safety. I was born, I grew up, and I live again here on Gadigal land. I joined ANROWS in February 2024, and I bring to this work a long-standing passion for helping to connect research, policy and practice to make progress on the social challenge of domestic, family and sexual violence. When I'm not at ANROWS, I volunteer my time on a number of boards, and one of those that's relevant for today is as chair of Gondwana Choirs. Gondwana is the leader in Australian choral performance, shaping the Australian sound through the creation and presentation of innovative new works. Gondwana provides opportunities to children and young people right across Australia of all backgrounds through world-class training by leading artists. It's not often that I get to bring this role outside of work into ANROWS, but as you'll hear in a moment, our incredible panel today includes one of these very artists, live and in person. Not here to sing, but to bring her other expertise in terms of what it looks like to connect and hear from young people in the development of research to drive change. Now, more than ever, I feel that my commitment in my role at ANROWS is really to support centering the voices that we need to hear in the evidence to drive change. Organisations like ours need to play a really active role in decolonising practices in research and in building and sustaining community trust and confidence in the evidence that shapes our behaviour, our actions and the decisions that we see made in government, in services and right across the country. Today's webinar really reflects and continues that commitment with a terrific range of perspectives and diverse expertise, both on the panel and among everyone joining us for this discussion. So I want to take a moment now to introduce the Australian National Research Agenda, which is really the driving force behind this webinar series from ANROWS. In 2022, the federal government launched a new national plan with the commitment to end violence against women and children in a single generation. As part of our role to help achieve this goal, ANROWS develops the Australian National Research Agenda to end violence against women and children. The current research agenda runs from 2023 through to 2028. The research agenda is a national framework identifying what evidence is needed to end domestic, family and sexual violence and how that evidence should be created. It was co-designed with victim survivors, researchers and practitioners, and it aims to help researchers, practitioners and experts drawing on lived experience, along with policymakers and funders, to ensure that the work to build the evidence base to drive change is organised, purposeful and effective. The research agenda identifies 9 priority areas of research, and you can see these in a diagram that we'll be showing on screen. These are the areas where new evidence is sorely needed to help end domestic, family and sexual violence. The research agenda also sets out the how. It's not just the research topics that we concentrate on, it's also how we undertake that research. The research agenda asks us to reflect on our approaches to domestic, family and sexual violence in the research, and it names 6 reflective prompts or ways of working, as well as ways of knowing. These are making better use of existing data, drawing on and centering Indigenous research methodologies, valuing the expertise of practitioners, listening to children when they are children, working with the knowledge of experts by experience, and creating space for pilots and evaluations of community-led interventions. This webinar is the fourth instalment of this series that explores the 6 ways of working and ways of knowing that we set out in the research agenda. Previous webinar recordings are all available via the ANROWS website. And this series is one of the ways that we're supporting people, particularly in the research space, and encouraging people to use the research agenda to guide the research that will help drive action to ending domestic, family and sexual violence. In today's webinar, we're focusing on how we listen to children when they are children. It's absolutely vital that we engage with children and young people as victim survivors of domestic and family violence in their own right. We know that they are victims and survivors in their own right. The evidence is really clear about that in terms of data and in terms of what we hear from children's own experiences. We know that bringing the voices of children and young people can add depth and insight into research, just as it does to how we design and deliver services in the practice environment. No question, there are challenges and additional considerations to make sure that when we engage children and young people in research, we do that safely. But we at ANROWS are really clear that those challenges don't outweigh the positive and the valid benefits of having children and young people engaged, of hearing from their voices and of understanding their opinions. So with that, enough from me. I'm really delighted now to move to introduce our panel. We have an absolutely terrific panel of speakers who are going to explore the nuances and draw on their own experience of this topic. You will have read their bios through our emails and through our social media. And so what I want to do now is to invite each panellist to introduce themselves and share with us as a starting contribution why this conversation is so important to them. I'm delighted to throw first to Leila Wenatong Schreiber, a Gubby Gubby woman, to introduce yourself to the audience. Thanks, Leila.
Yes, so I'm Leila Wenatong Schreiber. I am a Dowbara woman of the Kabi-speaking people, so a clan in the northern Kabi region. I am a Wenatong, also married to a Schreiber Kunganji man from Yarrabah. I work as a research coordinator for Deadly Inspiring Youth Doing Good up here in Gimoy, Cairns on Yidinji and Irukandji lands. And I think the conversation is really important because it provides a space for young people to practice their agency and autonomy, and that's something that's really important to us here at DIG. In saying that, I want to throw to our youth speaker, Georgiana.
Hi everyone, my name is Georgiana Thomas Padell. I was born and raised here in Far North Queensland at Gimoy on Yidinji country, and I have connections to both Mololigal and Kari nations in Zenalkes. Currently studying my Bachelor of Social Work and working at Deadly Inspiring Youth Doing Good as a program manager for our Good Vibrations program. And that's all about uplifting and building our future leaders by creating safe spaces and opportunities for them to connect, grow, and contribute. This conversation is really important to me because I believe that young people's voices should be valued, especially when making decisions that affect them. So I'll just throw to Georgina.
Thanks, Georgiana, and good afternoon, everyone. I live and work on the unceded lands of the people of the Yugambeh language group here on the Gold Coast, and I'm an Associate Professor of Law and a Research Associate of the Centre for Children and Young People at Southern Cross University. And this conversation is really important to me because children's rights, and especially their right to participate meaningfully and safely in decisions about their lives, must become business as usual if we're to recognise and respect children as family violence victim survivors in their own right, in research, in policy and practice. And the collaborative research that I do with children and young people who have lived experience of family violence and the family courts has highlighted to me just how much we can learn from children if we're open to listening to and understanding them. So it's a pleasure to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you all. And we're just so delighted to have you joining us and able to share the insights from your really extensive experience in how we work with and centre the voices and the insights of children and young people in the research to end domestic, family and sexual violence. Georgiana, I can't help myself. Can I come back to you just to invite your connection in the music of young people's voices as well? Because I think that's such a great way to think about how we hear from young people.
For sure. So yes, my bad. So I've been in Malia Choir since its inception, 2016, I believe, and I was a member of the Gondwana Indigenous Children's Choir like years before that as well. And I think being involved in that group helped me put my two passions for music and singing with advocacy and social work together, so that, yeah, and I don't know, it's been such an amazing opportunity, and to be able to talk about issues, sing about issues, and have people listen in a different format. So yeah, different from a speech or through music. So I thought that was really powerful, and I really enjoyed that experience. Yeah.
And such a great example of how you connect not only with audiences right across Australia, but even internationally. So we're going to put a link to the choir into the chat for people to follow up in your own time and get a bit of a sense of some of the ways we get such powerful young voices through music, as well as through the kind of discussion we're having today. Thanks for that, Georgiana. I want to acknowledge the issues that we're discussing are complex. And by definition, that means there's different ways of looking at them. There's different ways of approaching them. We really welcome those different perspectives. We see discussions like this as a way of making sense of those different approaches. And we've worked to build rapport and to develop an understanding between our panellists. And we've also worked to understand the different insights or expertise that might be sitting across audience participants. So we're going to approach differences of view respectfully. We're not looking for a single voice of truth. We don't think that's possible in this work, and we don't think that's helpful for really understanding the different opportunities for people to work with and centre the expertise of children and young people. We're also aiming to provide the audience with shareable and really practical examples of what good looks like. We are working to respect the confidentiality of the people, the communities and the organisations that we might talk about in this discussion. So we won't always give the full detail of an example, but we'll really try and drive towards those practical insights about how you can learn from and take this discussion into your own work. And with that, I'm going to come back to our panel now and throw in the first question. And really, this is an invitation to highlight the importance and the benefits of engaging with children and young people as part of the research process. Georgiana, let's hear from you first.
I think it's so important to engage young people in research because it recognises them as experts in their own lives and gives them power over their own stories. From my experience, a lot of young people aren't asked what they think or how decisions affect them. So being invited into these research spaces or consultation spaces can be so like validating to their experience. I've had young people say after a yarn that they can't believe people actually care what they think or that they want to hear their story. So even that's empowering. And I mainly work with young people from ages 16 to 25, and a lot of those research consultations I've supported are strength-based and in that proactive space, looking at leadership development and T2A. But yeah, I think that it's just important to involve young people because they bring fresh perspective and aren't tied down to how things have always been done, and can bring fresh eyes, I guess.
Thanks, Georgiana. Layla, interested in your experience of working with children and young people?
Well, I think just recapping on what Georgiana's saying too, Deadly Inspiring Youth Doing Good was created by young people that felt powerless, and they wanted, they said they wanted a seat at the table and wanted to be heard and felt really unheard. So I feel like just, research really does provide that opportunity for young people to be heard. And I think, as we continue this conversation, we'll sort of get deeper into, you know, really listening to young people and not being, you know, I guess, so extractive with research, being really careful to be participatory and to really include young people in the whole process. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I can add to that. I was just going to say to the, you know, talking about strength-based and just young people holding them as knowledge holders, which Georgiana touched on as well, that they do know things and they know, and it is like asking the right questions and in the right way as well, and in ways that they can express themselves too. Like, you know, I know we just talked about writing music, you know, yeah, and just, you know, being really flexible with the way that young people will engage and how they will tell their story. It doesn't always have to be a certain way. And yeah.
And Layla, when you talk about how to avoid being extractive, have you got an example or, you know, a way of helping people understand what it looks like to work differently?
Well, I guess, you know, so I've done research that I've actually been involved in some pretty extractive research, which was a very bad experience. But I think, you know, you're safe if you collaborate with with an organisation on the ground, especially an Aboriginal community controlled org. Then you know, like they're pretty much going to tell you to stop doing it like that, you know. And so that's what's been so, you know, I sort of had some bad experiences with research and conducting research, and I think I said to myself, oh, I'm never going to do research ever again if it's like this, if this is what it's like. That was 15 years ago. And so, yeah, being able to be a part of DIG, I was like, yes, this is how we do it. You know, this is like, it's led by community priorities, and it's so strengths-based, and we don't want to hear about our problems anymore, you know, like we just don't want to talk about, I know, I understand that there's a place for that as well, but yeah, just what is the solutions? And yeah, I think, yeah, hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, thanks, Layla. And Georgiana, you know, one of the things we sometimes see in the research is assuming that you can ask people to think about what it was like when they were children and young people. And we're really talking here about having children and young people engaged at the time that they're children and young people. What have been some of the things that you've seen that work to keep young people engaged in research processes? What's been effective in your work?
I think, yeah, like Anila, they were saying, being flexible in how you're delivering the content or how you're engaging with young people. So in the past, we've done different workshops where it's like hands-on activities, it being in a yarning circle instead of like a classroom setting where kids feel like they're being talked at. Yeah, I haven't. We've done in the past. We were looking at what does a purpose-built building look like for DIG, and so we're looking at safe spaces, not safe spaces. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And we built these little structures, and it just helped the young people to talk to and express their ideas more freely because they had this thing in front of them that they could yarn to. So yeah, I guess having different methods of getting that.
Yeah, that's such a great example. Thank you. Georgina, let's come to you. Just really interested to hear what you've observed in terms of how researchers interact with children and young people during the research that you've undertaken.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Tessa. So I can speak to my experience collaborating with children and young people who have experienced family violence on the Children's Voices for Change project, and more recently, children whose parents have gone through the family law system and the children's participation in family law research project. And I would say my learnings from those collaborative research projects with children and young people with lived experience have highlighted the importance of building trust and navigating effective collaboration with children and young people in doing participatory research with them. And during the research processes, we've sought to, that when I say we, the research team and I have really sought to build trust from the outset with children and young people by ensuring we understand what they would like and how they would like the process to run. So meeting them where they're at rather than imposing a set of our academic research processes on children and young people. And that's something that I've learned has been really important. The importance of being flexible as a researcher. And I would say, this research is, it's challenging, but it's also so rewarding. And in terms of building that trust early on in the research process, Layla, coming back to the point that you made earlier about ensuring that it's not extractive for children and young people. So in connections or interviews we've done with the children and young people, we always find that we introduce ourselves, share fun facts, and have an icebreaker exchange. And, one of the young people I spoke with said, well, you and I have common ground because we both have cats. And so we were talking about our cats. And after our initial interview in the Family Law Project, a number of children and young people did feel comfortable enough to share constructive feedback with us. And so some told us that they might have preferred a bit more communication. Others thought that some of the questions were a bit boring or repetitive. So they did feel, and I thought that was terrific, that they felt comfortable enough to provide that feedback so that we could adapt and ensure that that the subsequent steps of the research process were exactly what or were suited to their needs and experiences. And picking up on some points that you made earlier, Georgiana, how we've found and the feedback we've received from children and young people in the research about their involvement. Some have described their experience as being cathartic. So some have said, look, I felt good speaking about it. I've got everything off my chest. And one young person said, the experience has been very healing because I felt that I've been heard this whole time when, like someone's listening, which I felt was lacking during the family law process. So I think these reflections in terms of the value and benefits of research with children and young people with lived experience is that it can be in some ways a powerful therapeutic tool. But I would also say what I've learned from the process is that it can involve or expose, I would say, a disconnect between agency and social change for children involved in research like this in circumstances where they have experienced systemic barriers to participation. And so, I did recall one young person ask, well, the info you're getting from me, does this actually help the future? Is it actually going to get to the governmenty people? She asked me. And I thought, it's a question that suggests curiosity, but also really valid skepticism about, if we're asking children and young people to engage in research, what are we doing with the information that they share with us? And I think that comes back to that feedback loop and children and young people, accepting that their participation might not change their own outcome or circumstances, but wanting to be able to pay that forward and know that what they're doing is going to have a broader impact. So I feel that the onus on us as researchers is to ensure that children and young people's direct voices and experiences get to policymakers, get to judges, get to those who can do something with it.
Thanks, Georgina. And I just want to share with our panellists, we've explicitly said to our panellists they do not need to monitor the chat through this discussion, but there's a lot of love coming through from our audience for all the things that all of you have said. So thank you on behalf of our audience who's really engaged, and we do have some great questions coming through. So just again, reminder to the audience, if you can field those questions and funnel them through the Q&A function, then we can do our best to make sure we answer them. And in the meantime, keep sharing the love. Georgina, let's stay with you just for a moment because you've talked a bit about some of those differences of view between researchers who might come with a very fixed view or idea about what they're going to do, and then how they need to adapt and open up if they really want to centre that experience of children and young people in the work. So can you tell us a bit about some of the process issues that you or that you've seen other researchers encounter when they've been engaging with children and young people, and just go to some of those really practical examples that can be so instructive for our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can start by sharing a failure, something that didn't work from a research project that I learned immensely from in adapting the collaborative research with children and young people, and that came from the Children's Voices for Change project, which involve understanding effective supports for children and young people who have experienced family violence. And at the outset, we had established a project advisory group, which included 5 children and young people with lived experience of family violence, aged between 11 and 25, as well as professionals from the family violence and broader child and family services sectors. We brought together the young people and the professionals in a Zoom meeting for our first advisory group. And from the outset, there were 5 young people and I think maybe 15 researchers, professionals, adults. And from the outset, it was clear that this was not a comfortable and safe space for those young people. And so that's something that we provided the young people, accessible versions of the documents, and we came into this meeting, with the best of intentions that this was going to be an effective meeting to understand what the project was about and to chart the agenda for the research. And following that meeting, I felt that I'd failed those young people, and so I had a conversation with them where they shared with me what they felt wasn't right about that advisory group meeting. That there were the power disparities, too many professionals with the young people there feeling that they weren't included in the conversation. And so that really reset our collaborative working relationship. And so from that point, we discussed with myself and the young people agreed that we would set up our own youth advisory group. And so that's where I would meet with the 5 young people. And they felt that was a much more effective way of navigating the advisory mechanism for this project. And the young people and I from that project have written an article together reflecting on our collaborative research experience. And one of the young people noted that they appreciated my willingness and flexibility to adapt the processes to ensure that it suited them. So I think that's something, drawing from that, where I felt that I let down those young people. We were able to pivot, and from that point onwards, it was just a brilliant working relationship where I felt that I have learned so much from the young people I work with. And so the subsequent research projects that I'm involved in now, or that I've led, we have a separate youth advisory group where we do establish that trust and rapport. So I think that flexibility and ensuring that you're adaptable and ensure that you're listening to the young people about what they need and want from the research process. So I think that's just one learning that I think, if that's something that people can take away from that experience.
Thanks, Georgina. I really love that example of what it looks like to be flexible and adaptable in the work. And also just really appreciate you acknowledging we don't always get it right. And what we absolutely, want people coming into this work, and we think about this ourselves as ANROWS, coming into this work not doing harm. And we have to be open to learning that sometimes, best intentions are not what's going to be needed. And so that insight into how you learn, and also how you learn with participants, with those young experts in your work, is just such a great example for all of us. Georgiana, would love to come to you. You've had so much experience in thinking about different ways to engage young people's voices. Can you give us an example of where you've seen good practice in this kind of really core commitment to engaging children and young people?
Yes. Let me have a think. I feel like best practice would look like what Georgina was saying before, building that rapport and that relationship first before going in and getting to business or whatever. So I think that if you have time to do that, otherwise, connecting with organizations on the ground in the community that you're working with, I feel like is the best way to go.
And Georgiana, I know you've talked about some examples, sometimes in your own work at Dig, sometimes with other partners, around some of the processes that you think help sort of build that rapport.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about how you've seen yarning circles and other spaces work well?
Yeah, so I feel like just the yarning circle in general, like there's no head of the table, it's everyone's on the same level. So even just that kind of space is nice to have. I have only been really working in group settings when it comes to consultations. So that's kind of our go-to. But I think involving young people in the full process. So in coming up with the questions, in the feedback loops, making sure that, you know, what the young people are saying and what the research is hearing is actually, you know, matches. Yeah, so I guess that's important to have young people involved in each stage. I have been involved in situations where facilitators kind of, you can tell that young people haven't been involved. And I guess not being flexible and how that can be damaging to the young people and possibly like their involvement in future research or collaboration because they've had that bad experience. Yeah, so something to think about, I guess.
Thanks, Georgiana. There's just such great tips there, I think, for people who are thinking about or learning about this research. Also great opportunities, I think, for everyone to reflect on the way we show up. What are some of the tells for you when you're in a conversation or you're in a piece of work and you're starting to feel like this hasn't actually been grounded or hasn't connected with young people from the start?
Well, what we look at is like body language, non-verbal cues. So you can see like people kind of sit back and looking towards like other people in the group. And I guess it's important to have a support person in there with them so that they can have someone advocating for them. And if something's uncomfortable, they have that safe person that they can go to. Yeah, and I guess I've also done some work online, doing online consultations, and that was very different because you can't really see that body language and those cues. So I guess that's just, you need to have those extra steps in place, make sure that you're checking in. I mean, we had like group chats afterwards and messaging and just being available for clarity and whatever else. Yeah, I think is really important.
Thanks, Georgiana. Layla, you mentioned you have had those experiences where you didn't feel great about the research or the assumptions that were driving it. What are some of the red flags or the indicators that you use to decide, you know, when you want to be involved in a project or when you decide it's not work that you want to be part of?
Well, I guess I'll start with the bad experience, which wasn't with Dig. And I was a lot younger too. So it was, you know, where you were sort of, it was a project where we were cold facing people. So we were just rocking up to houses. And yeah, I think that was just, there was a lot of, you know, like, and Georgina, like she touched on this too, just like that intuition, you know, going, okay, this isn't right. You know, something isn't right here. And yeah, we need to pivot and make it a bit different. And I think because I was younger, I didn't really have that capacity to do that. But it did make me really reflect on the idea of consent. And, you know, and this wasn't with young people, this was, you know, in one of our communities. And so there is still that power imbalance. And so just going, okay, you know, sometimes people say, yeah, okay, to do something, but they don't actually really want to do it at all. And you can really tell from the body language, you know, yeah, and just listen to that. Like, don't try to get your data and think that your data is more important than a relationship, you know, especially with young people. I think working here at Dig is completely different. And we've actually developed some research principles that we operate by, and that's for research that we do in-house, but also research that we do that we accept externally, because sometimes we get people coming to us and asking if they can come and talk to some young people about something. And so I'll just quickly go through that. So we base it on Lester Irabina-Rigney's work. And so we operate from a strengths, not deficit. So there's 4 strengths, not deficit. It says we are not the problem. And so, you know, our research has to always be about our strengths and not viewing us as a problem or our young people as a problem. It has to be emancipatory. And, I think Georgina touched on this as well, that it has to dismantle systems or root causes, and young people need to know that what they're saying is going to matter and is going to do something. Yeah. And so I think that's why our organisation got involved with this ANROWS research and with QuatSIP as well, because there was that. We had our men's group running, and to just see the intersection between domestic violence and child safety, we were just like, oh, this is going to address some of the heavy and some of the root things, so that was really important to us to be involved in it. Another one is our young people's voices are central. They are the knowledge holders, and integrity. So we see integrity as research that is participatory. It has reciprocity, and it benefits our community. So that's pretty much it. I think too, just the whole thing about reading a room, reading and it's the same, just pivoting and trusting your intuition.
Yeah. Thanks, Layla, and Georgiana and Georgina too. And again, there's just lots of responsiveness from people who are joining us live. We will have some time to come to other questions from the audience, but I just want to pick up one that's come up because it's really relevant here. And it's really focusing on how do we hear from young children. So I just wanted to throw open to the panel whether you've got any insights. I mean, the question has sort of picked up particularly, the difference between a 6-year-old and a 16-year-old as a for example. Anything that any of you want to contribute just in terms of thinking about younger children and, to the points that you've all made about how you do that safely, how you do that appropriately, and how you really do that in a way that is strengths-based and supportive.
Jump in just with some examples from the Children's Participation in Family Law project and the Children's Voices for Change project. The youngest child we had involved in those research projects was 8 years of age due to ethics processes, and I'm sure we'll come to discuss our research ethics shortly. But something that we've found really valuable in terms of engaging with younger children is providing them with opportunities to contribute in different ways. So through artwork and through drawing, writing, contributing, whether it's through audio, visual, voiceovers, and so on. So we haven't been required only, verbal interviews, but also contributing in those different ways, and also giving the child the opportunity to meet at a place that feels comfortable and safe for them. So for that project, we offered young people an in-person interview, and so for one young person, the researcher met them at a sports field, and they walked around and did the interview. And for another, they were there with their mother, who was their trusted adult or support person, and they chose to do the interview in person at a private meeting room in a public library. So I think just offering those options, and as appreciate that there's not that one-size-fits-all approach. Again, coming back to that flexibility, and particularly we've found with the younger children in our project, they've really taken to drawings and those more perhaps even having the opportunity to have fidget toys with them and providing those tactile or sensory supports to enable them to participate.
Thanks, Georgina. Georgiana, Layla, anything you want to add to that question about focusing on younger children?
We actually don't have that much experience working with the really younger kids. I think ours have always been 10 and over. But yeah, I think just reiterating what Georgina said, when we have done worked with that age group, it has been very hands-on, and it's been either building things or drawing things or putting something up on a board. It's more interactive than it is just having a conversation. Although I know they weren't under 10, they were over 10 as well in a yarning session, and they were fine with that. I think it's just reading the room, reading what's happening, and just I think if you have a lot of experience working with young people, because we already know them all and their families, and so there's already a connection there. So it does mean that we you know, we don't always have to bring in lots of other things. We can just have a yarn, you know. Yeah, and it is already a sort of safe place. So yeah, but everything that Georgina said, I 100% agree.
Thanks, Taylor. And I think that I think just hearing from you there, the importance of those relationships is also such a strong reminder that those ideas about independence in the research, which have often assumed no relationships, is part of the barrier to hearing the voices of people who are excluded by those processes. So, you know, we think about relational ways of working as really core to making sure that we get different forms of expertise in the evidence. And you've just given us a beautiful example of what that looks like in your work. Georgiana, anything from you or from your experience in terms of working with the little ones?
Yeah, like I said earlier, is my expertise is more 16 to 25. I do have younger siblings though, so yeah, definitely I agree with Georgina and Annie Leila, the hands-on, the finding different ways and being flexible. But then also I guess that it can be nerve-wracking being in a place that you don't know with people you're unfamiliar with. And I guess if you don't fully know what to expect or what is asked of you. So I guess, yeah, having that support person, having mum or dad or guardian, there.
Thanks, Georgiana. And you've given us some really great insights in terms of the work you do with young people through DIG. What about what you've learned yourself in terms of the experiences that you've had?
The experience that I've had aside from DIG has been that really not having that relationship feels kind of extractive, which is why we focus on it so much and why I focus on it so much in my work, and why I'm passionate about making sure that young people feel safe and valued and heard. Yeah, so I guess,
Yeah, that's a really key one, isn't it? I think we're hearing that from lots of different perspectives across the panel, that importance of those relationships in building
definitely.
trust.
Yeah.
And it leads really nicely to the next question that we wanted to talk about, which is really just any key tips or strategies that you all have used and have found work in building that trust. And you've shared a lot already. So we've got some great examples and we'll kind of relay those back to our audience at the end. But just wanted to give some space and see whether there's anything else that you think is really good advice for people in terms of communicating and building that trust with children and young people to create that really positive working relationship. Who wants to jump in first?
I can go. I was just thinking that I think because we're speaking from an Indigenous perspective as well, having like Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, you know, research assistants or I don't know, whatever it is that you call it, to really make those connections. I think, you know, I've found that so much easier as if we know a family, like if we know their family members, you know, like especially here. So it's that yarn of, oh yeah, well, yeah, I know your uncle, blah, blah, blah. And you just see all the walls come down and then that you just get a very deep, yeah, really good conversation. But in saying that, I don't like that doesn't mean that you can't relate to our children. And I think Georgina touched on this really early too, was that connection and that finding common ground. You know, she was talking about how one of the young people was like, oh, you've got a cat too, I've got a cat, or, you know, we both like cats, you know, like, yeah, just finding places where you connect. And just, I think with our young people too, because we do have a lot of young people who have experienced a lot of crisis. I think being authentic is really, really important. Just being authentically you and actually really caring, not pretending that you care so that you can get something, you know. Yeah, just authentically you, because they can just read when you're gammon, and then you know, and then you won't get you know, you just won't build that connection, and then you won't get good stuff, you know. Yeah, or you won't get honest responses. Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah.
The great pickup.
Anything?
Georgina?
I'm going to jump in. Something that I haven't mentioned previously is providing children and young people with that safe space to know that they can jump out at any time from the research. So enabling them to feel comfortable enough to say, well, this is getting pretty heavy. I need to step away for a little bit. And that happened a couple of times in the context of even our advisory groups, where we were working through responses from other children and young people, and the advisory group, the young advisors, were helping us to co-analyse that. And one of the young people said, look, this is really getting heavy. Can we take a break? And so, we did that. Also giving them, again, related to that, giving them space to, if they feel that they can't contribute, in facilitating workshops for the family law project. We said, well, if you're not sure what to write or what to draw, you can just draw a spiral, and one of the young people said, look, that just felt really validating or safe to say, okay, well, I don't feel pressured to contribute all the time and to be switched on all the time. So I think enabling young people to feel that, as well as establishing common ground, but then throughout the process to know that they're not under that pressure. So to feel that they can contribute how and when they like. And another practical one is really scheduling meetings after school time, or at times when other young people can join. And so that was something that was, again, required flexibility from the researchers' end, but meant that the young people could join, after their school, after their activities, and the meetings were, not too long, so not too tiring for them as well.
Beautiful example. Thanks, Georgina. Georgiana, any last tips or suggestions around how to build that trust and communicate well?
I think, following on from what Aunty Layla was saying about being genuine, and that young people can sense when you're not. And I think one point is leading questions and kind of coming into the space already feeling like what they're going to say, or what you're hoping to get from that conversation, if that makes sense. That's going to lead to them not being honest or feeling safe to actually express what they want to say. Yeah. I've definitely experienced that myself, where I can tell that they're kind of, oh, this is kind of what I'm looking for. So then I just, I don't know.
Thanks, Georgiana.
Thank you.
So look, we have continued to get a lot of love and some just fantastic questions from our audience. So thank you everyone who's put in your responses to what you're hearing, and also the questions that are burning for you. I'm going to move into some of those questions now. And Georgina, I'm going to come back to you. You are absolutely right. The question of ethics has come up from lots of people. And so let's start with you. I'd just really love you to talk us through how you navigate those formal ethics approval processes, and maybe even just talk a bit about what they look like in your work and how you navigate them. And then we'll open that up, because obviously there's lots of ethical considerations beyond those specific processes. But let's start with you on that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tessa. So, as you know, the National Statement on Ethical Conduct in Human Research identifies that research involving children and young people raises particular ethical concerns around capacity to consent, potential coercion to participate, and conflicting values and interests. And they are live ethics challenges that the research team and I encountered with the children's participation in Family Law Project. As an ethical safeguard to minimise risk to children and young people, we recruited through organisations and service providers, and our approach, that approach of recruitment through organisations and service providers, sought to ensure that each child or young person had an established relationship with an organisation or a practitioner with whom they had previously engaged, and that provided an additional lens through which to assess their eligibility and take into account factors that might make their participation contrary to their best interests. Now, what we found as a challenge doing this, using this recruitment approach, was that many service providers, family law professionals, ignored our communication, and that could be that obviously we weren't aware of their day-to-day operating environment and their capacity, which might have impacted their ability to disseminate the research opportunity. But we did have a network or particular service provider who declined to share the research opportunity with its members on the basis that it's not quite the right message we want to send. And we just really, at least from my point of view, queried what message we were sending to involve children and young people in a research project. Another ethical issue that we encountered with the Children's Participation in Family Law project was the requirement for parental consent. And in our initial application to the Ethics Committee, we proposed that children and young people aged 16 years and above could provide their own consent, while children aged 10 to 15 would need the co-consent of a trusted adult of their choosing. So it could be a parent or guardian, but it might have been an older sibling, a teacher, a counsellor, a caseworker. And we took this approach from the Children's Voices for Change project, which was a key learning and I would say an innovation of some sort in ethics, where we did get approval for the children and young people who have experienced family violence to select a trusted adult to provide co-consent. And that was an idea, an initiative of the youth advisory group members of that project, which the Ethics Committee at the time accepted and was acknowledging the risks that might be involved where a child or young person might not have a protective parent, or where they might pose a barrier to involvement. However, in this project, the Ethics Committee raised concerns about what it called the dynamics and risks involved with trusted adults and relationships with family members, where the child or young person might select a trusted adult who isn't a parent. And the Ethics Committee said that parents have rights to be informed of research outcomes. And so on that basis, we did amend our consent process to require children aged 10 to 15 to provide co-consent of one parent or guardian who had sole or shared parental responsibility. Now, that was an example, though, where the Ethics Committee took a different approach to this issue of co-consent. And what we did find, though, as a way of ensuring children and young people's ongoing consent, and Layla, you mentioned the issue of consent earlier, was to recognise that consent is an ongoing process. But in terms of initial barriers to ethics, in terms of the process, there are a couple that we encountered with that project.
Such an important reminder, Georgina, consent can always be withdrawn. That's inherent in what it means. Thank you for that. Layla, Georgiana, interested in your reflections around the ethics of the work, and also to recognise there's, what you might think about in university contexts around formal ethics processes, but there's a lot more to thinking about the ethics of this work as well. Any reflections from you about how you've navigated that or what you've seen as effective? Georgiana, let's come to you first.
Okay. I guess my main thing is ensuring clarity and transparency so that the young people know what they're being asked to participate in, how their information will be used, and then hearing back at the end of it. There's been so many experiences where researchers will come in and then we never see what's come from that. Yeah. So I just think that's so important. Yeah.
Thanks, Georgiana. Layla, anything from you?
What Georgiana said. No. No. But yeah, I think too, we sort of have our own sort of ethics that we do at DIGE, where we ring people and talk to each other and all go, okay, what do we think about this and what do we think about that? And do we think that this is okay? And this seems off to me. Do we know this person or do we know that person? This is if other researchers sort of come in, because even though you get your ethics approved, sometimes it's still not really ethical to us. And so we do sort of have that bit of a process ourselves. And even for ourselves, when we're doing our own internal evaluations, we go through this process of really talking to each other and talking things out and going, okay, something seems off to me. Does this question seem off? And it's always talking to the young people, trialing stuff out and going, okay, they didn't get that. Like, especially we've got a whole disability arm, and I think once I sent through some questions to staffing because I couldn't be there, and she was like, "Oh, ask the questions," and she went and did it with like one of the other mob, and they were just like couldn't understand what she was saying, and and so it is that thing of you do sort of need to know how to pivot and how to ask a question differently, but I think I've pretty much answered the ethics. Otherwise, I'll go on another whole tangent.
And they're, again, just reminding us what we mean when we're talking about the relational ways of working. And that's just another great example from you, Layla. Thank you. Look, we've had so many fantastic questions in the conversation from our audience. We're not going to get to all of them. One thing that has come up in a couple of different questions in different ways is the question about people using violence. And that's a huge interest for us at ANROWS. We've got a big grants round in the field at the moment. We're starting to gather early insights from research on people using violence. But obviously, when we're talking about children and young people, I think in the public conversation about violence, we hold these very distinct ideas about victim survivors and people who use violence. But we see that that can be quite complex when we're talking about children and young people, particularly children who've had an experience of being a victim or survivor and then have gone on to use violence in their relationships. So I just want to give a final minute to the panellists, if any of you have any reflections about the ethics around involving people who might be using violence, or even how you work with families where parents might be involved in the research but might also have been using violence themselves. There's a lot there. It's a hard one to give a quick response to, but just if there's any insights from any of the panel. Is that something that's come up for you, Layla, in any of your research?
I was hoping Georgina would say something. When we did our research for the healing needs of boys and men, that actually we weren't allowed to interview anyone that was currently using violence. And so that was sort of stipulated throughout the yarn. It was really like, if you're currently experiencing it, don't come, because it's just too raw. And and we have this saying at Dig that you don't open a box unless you can pack it back up again, and so there was that thing of, we didn't feel like we were prepared to be able to pack that back. And that there was a lot of even with the young people that we interviewed, we didn't because you couldn't really ask, have you ever seen someone in your family get you're not asking that. And so you're just the questions that we asked were really quite they were like, what do you think a young person would feel? What do you think a boy might feel like if he experiences this? And how do you think he might respond? And then they were able to identify their own, if they wanted to talk about their own experience, that was a past experience, they could. But if they just wanted to talk about it as this person that, wasn't directly them, then they could talk about it through that way. But I think that was the WhatsApp thing, that they were just like, no, can't do it.
So we will take that one on notice. Thank you for the great questions about people using violence in this work. I'm going to take that invitation from you, Layla, to wrap this up. It is really important that we give people the space to reflect on what you've heard. And just a huge thanks to this incredible panel, Georgiana, Layla and Georgina. You've given us amazing tips about how to build rapport and trust through the work, how critical those relationships are to engaging with children and young people. You've talked about the opportunities to partner where we don't have those relationships ourselves, and you've given some really great insight about what it looks like to bring support for the research and for the participants in it. So we want to close out this webinar now. We do want to bring the National Research Agenda back into focus. That is a guide for everyone doing research, not just for ANROWS, and it gives such a clear drive and direction to focus the collective effort on building the evidence that can really drive change. And I don't think we can say it any better than Georgiana and Layla, you've already said it. The engagement and the commitment to people with lived experience, that experience will be used to drive change, is such a core commitment from all of us. And it's another way of reflecting reflecting some of those really core principles in the National Research Agenda. A huge thanks once again to Georgiana Thomas-Peddle, to Layla Winnetong-Schreiber, and to Georgina Demopoulos for your incredible insights and generosity in sharing them today. And we are going to put again in the chat a link to Malia, which is a really nice way to have some music round out your reflection for this discussion today. Thanks very much.